the thing that I love about playing on my own is that you can hold more time. You can really take your time and enjoy the spaciousness of a room and really enjoy the silences, play with the silences, and really play with those little interactions you have with the audience.
Hi Esther, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm so well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. It's so lovely to have you here. I have met you in one of the Zoom Room Hack Chats with Anna Dunwoody last year, and you're coming to Halfest New Zealand next year. And I'm so happy to have this chance to sit down with you and talk about your work, as I was really intrigued by the different things that you were working on when I was listening in last year. So tell us about your music journey and how did you come across the harp? How did that enter the picture?
Well, I was one of the very few people in the world whose neighbor was a harpist. And so I was playing the piano a little bit and I played violin too. But my neighbor was a harpist, so I was able to kind of learn to play the harp without having to invest in buying one, which was really handy for me. And I just became really kind of obsessed with it when I was young. And then there was a harp at my school, so I was kind of able to start playing it there at school and at home. And I just couldn't get enough. There was something about the sonority of it and the mood that it put me in. And yeah, it just made me like feel really satisfied. So I just thought, okay, this is something I really want to stick with.
And how has your journey with the harp changed over the years? I take that you started playing the harp quite young then.
I did, yeah. I started from the age of about 9, I think, with Charlotte Peterson, who is still my really good friend and a fantastic teacher based in Peebles, where I'm from. And yeah, I had a lot of lessons with Charlotte, who boosted my confidence and made the harp really fun for me to start with, and just was really encouraging and gentle, which was what I needed personally. I really appreciate the gentle touch when it comes to learning something. And it's sort of my style of teaching too. I think it's just so important to nurture us as individuals and creatives, for especially for young. But then I went on to study with quite a few different teachers, including, I'm trying to give you the short list: Isabel Miras, Katrina Mackay, Michelle Whelans, and then when I was at the RNCM, the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, I studied with Ira Lynn Jones for 4 years, which is amazing. And she really encouraged me to develop the kind of creative side of myself, which I always incorporated into my playing with all of my teachers. Actually, that's something that I can say about all of them, is that they have a creative flair and they're all very kind of individual with their own styles. And they encouraged me to do the same thing. And I think because I had quite a few different teachers over the years, I was even more encouraged to be myself because I saw these different teachers in their amazing careers and how they'd carved out this niche for themselves based on their individuality and their own unique styles and their own unique creative kind of output. And so it really encouraged me, the kind of diverse palette of influences that I had growing up really encouraged me through college, and then with Ira as well, who encouraged me both with my orchestral music career, which I loved. I absolutely love playing in orchestra, but also with my own individual style of playing, which has really become the basis of my career. So yeah,
That's
it's been
fantastic. Is there
work.
any big takeaways from working with many teachers that really have shaped beyond, injecting your own creativity into your work? Because a lot of us don't have the opportunity necessarily to work with different teachers, and sometimes we thought maybe sticking with one is better. But I think in your case, I can see the influence of working with different teachers has really shaped who you are. What are some of your biggest takeaway and thoughts on your journey with learning the art with many different people?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, as I said, it's I think my biggest takeaway is that it's encouraged me to be my own personality, my own musical personality. And it's also encouraged me to branch out and meet other harpists and be sociable with the instrument, because all of those teachers were amazing and so encouraging. And, teachers aren't scary. If you have the right teachers, they really aren't scary, and harpists aren't scary. And I think there's so much room in the world for all of us, and there's so much different teaching techniques, and there's so much different styles of music making out there. So I think, yeah, that the biggest takeaway is that diversity is what I want in my life. And yeah, to always kind of be open to new experiences, new personalities, new musical personalities and styles.
And talk about diversity. I think one word that I would use to describe you, it's very innovative. You're doing a lot of really interesting things. And when I was preparing for the interview and I look up your work, and I hardly see a lot of stuff that you do alone. You usually bring in a lot of people in your project, which is so much fun. But before we dive into that, tell us about your music. I hate to use the word genre because I don't think I can put you in one lane necessarily, but describe to us your music. What is your music like?
Hmm. Well, I've released two solo EPs. I do occasionally tour as a soloist, and actually that's something I'm going to be doing more because I'm releasing my debut solo album next year in probably in the spring next year here in the UK, which then I hope to go on and tour in New Zealand. But I'll actually be doing a kind of preview tour of that album in in January and February next year, including at the Harp Festival in New Zealand. So I'm really excited about that. Um, but I guess ways to describe my music would be very rhythmically driven. It involves a lot of improvisation. My influences include Steve Reich, minimalism, dance music, certainly Scottish folk music, lots of jazz influences. I really love the kind of rich harmony in jazz music, but also certainly classical influences like the classics like Debussy and all the romantic composers. I mean, I think it's kind of impossible as a harpist to get away from those like beautiful romantic harp composers who kind of shaped our instrument really, like the double action pedal harp, which is my kind of main harp. I also play the clarsach, which is in the corner over there, covered in some some clothes. But I also play the pedal harp, which is right here, and that's my kind of main instrument. And yeah, I think it just lends itself to so much beautiful, rich harmony and color, and again, just diversity. Like it's such an amazingly diverse instrument, and it's so big, so it can make so many different sounds. Um, and yeah, so that I suppose they are my main palette of influences. But I'm always listening to new music. I'm obsessed with like hearing from different new artists. It's just incredible, what people are making at the moment in these times, and it's amazing how accessible music is now, and we can just like listen to whatever we want online, and it's kind of ridiculous actually. It kind of scares me how accessible music is, because obviously as musicians, we deserve to get credit for this work that we're putting out all the time, but at the same time, it's for someone who loves music and loves new music and discovering new composers and new acts and new performers, it's just an absolute delight for me to be able to dip into the internet and like look up someone that I've heard about through a friend or something. And so yeah, I'm a lot of different influences, lots of pop music as well. Like I love Radiohead and the kind of harmony around Radiohead, and I love John Metcalf, who does lots of really beautiful arrangements, and folk artists like Sam Amidon and Lau and Bjork. I'm obsessed with Bjork. and Kate Bush. Anyway, I could go on forever. I'm gonna stop now because, as you can tell, there's a lot of different things involved in my music.
Yeah, and I think that's great because the instrument, I think, has a very sort of stereotypical image of the orchestral classic kind of association, if you will, that when you ask someone about the harp, that's usually what come out in our head. So when I look at your work, and I almost see that you're, bringing the harp into a more modern uh, way, and make it, like you said, accessible, because we can relate to that. I feel like at least I can relate to it a lot easier. And speaking of relating, I personally was in a choir for many years and I love singing. When I hear that someone is singing and playing the harp, which you do a lot, I was very excited. And on top of that, I discovered that you're doing something really cool in a band called 12 Days There, where you're meeting up with your friend there and improvising without any planning. That's something that I think you're doing in Patreon. Tell us about that, and tell us about 12 Day, because I think the music there is super fun.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Katrina, who is the other half of 12th Day. 12th Day is kind of first and foremost a duo, but sometimes we play with a bassist and a drummer. But yeah, we have been playing together now for 15 years, so she's sort of my longest collaboration. That's meant that we just have this really deep kind of shared musical language, loads of shared influences as well, and kind of draw on the same influences. And so we just have so much in common, which means that we can kind of speak to each other really fluidly, musically. And so yeah, we decided to make these improvisations to keep the playfulness in our music, and kind of keep, I suppose, keep creating during the pandemic when it was hard to actually be together in person and kind of bounce off the audience, because so often, you need an audience there to really feel something and like be energized by each other. And a concert will completely depend on who is in the room and how they're interacting with you and what the acoustics are like and what time of day it is and like the kind of like mood people are in. And so to kind of have all of that taken away, we thought, it would be really nice to kind of try to keep this playfulness and this interaction and spontaneity in our music alive somehow. But then we also just really enjoy improvising together, and it's something we take really seriously. And, I think it can so easily, be something people are either really afraid of or maybe don't take seriously enough. It like playtime in music is something that I take really seriously. That sounds like a bit of a kind of juxtaposition,
Serious
but
play is a thing.
hey, yeah, but I really do. I think interacting and creating and being in a headspace of creativity and spontaneity and just being able to communicate really deeply with another person requires a lot of thought and a lot of playfulness and a lot of interaction, and for you to lower your guard and be really vulnerable with that person. And going back to kind of why I play the harp, I suppose like I sing for the same reason that I play the harp, is because my voice and the harp are just kind of a vessel. It could be any instrument. They're just kind of a vessel for me to, make sound, and like they're an extension of what I want to do, if you know what I mean, just in my physical body. So yeah, so I suppose I feel really kind of like it's important to connect with the person behind the musician, and again with the audience members as people as well. And especially I think after the pandemic, I feel really even more kind of excited about connecting with audience and really kind of trying to have that strong connection, work out what that is and how to achieve that. So yeah.
That's awesome. And you have released quite a bit of album in 12th Day there. So if we're new to the music, which one would you suggest us as a gateway into the music of 12th Day?
Uh, I think I'd gonna say the latest album because it still feels quite new. We launched that album at the end of 2019, so it's just before the pandemic hit. And so it still feels like we haven't properly toured that album. We've played it in the UK and a little bit in Europe, but we haven't played it as much as we would have loved to. But yeah, we're so proud of that album. I'd say it's the first album with drums and bass as well as the two of us, and we produced it ourselves. So we're really proud of that.
That's
um,
awesome. Where
yeah.
can we find the music for 12 Day?
So if you go to our website, you can go to www.12thDaymusic.com. And we're also all over social media. So
Perfect.
if you go to 12th Day Music, you can find us on Instagram, which is probably our best social media platform. And we like to share what we're up to. We were actually working together through this last week, and we were making some new music this last week in a beautiful studio in the countryside in Scotland, and which we'll be releasing very soon. So look out for that.
Yeah, we will. And it's so amazing that you have someone that you have been collaborating with for such a long time. And I can only imagine what that connection adds to the music that you two produce. And speaking of connection, an observation of mine is that you play with a lot of other instruments and you write for ensemble and big groups as well. What got you into composing and what is it like to write for others?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I sort of always written music since I started playing the harp. That was another thing that my lovely teachers, encouraged me. And Charlotte, I used to bring her little tunes that I wrote about butterflies or flowers or when I was little, when I was 9 and 10. And she was so sweet about the little things that I wrote. And so it's always been a part of my musical journey. I've always wanted to make my own music. Yeah, just kind of, again, be creative in it. I did quite a lot of composition work at school, but then I went on to sort of study the harp officially. But I wrote music whilst I was at college for my group Clouds Harp Quartet, who are a group of 4 harpists. I write the music for that, but I say write, but it's not actually written down. So with that group, we always work by ear. So I teach the music to them by ear, and then we improvise together because there are sections within the music for improvising. And so it always kind of moves, and there's a lot of communication between the 4 of us because quite often, we have to have a lot of visual cues about who's going where and how to lock in rhythmically and things like that. So I think that's something that people always comment on when they come and see us live, because we played together just last week actually. We got a lot of comments that we just communicate with each other a lot on stage. We're kind of staring at each other this whole time. So that's really fun.
Mm.
And yeah, I like to write for lots of different instruments, including, who have I written for? So I've written for a bassoon player over in the States, which is brilliant, and saxophonist. I've written a big band piece, which is called Light Gatherer, which was a commission from Manchester Jazz Festival here in the UK. And that was for 11 people. So it was for the harp quartet, drums and piano and string trio and trombone and saxophone. And I've written a string quartet piece, which was brilliant, for the Brodick String Quartet, who are a Scottish string quartet. And who else? Lots of people. So yeah, I love writing for people. I mean, I think instruments are fascinating and what they can do, but the person behind the instrument is what I'm interested in finding. So for example, with my commission for the bassoonist and the harpist over in America, my brief for the commission was to write a suite that is an Alice in Wonderland suite, so about the story of Alice in Wonderland. And so that's already got a really kind of lovely, evocative story to it
Yeah.
to go with it. But then I also wrote for my friend Rosanna, who is an amazing harpist, and she's a really flamboyant musician and a really generous performer and really theatrical. So I wrote a really theatrical piece to go with her personality and quite a flamboyant piece. So it was, yeah, it was really fun to kind of write for her. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And do you find writing for instrument different than writing songs?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yes, I think because I work quite a lot with poetry, because I love working with words and stories and poems. So I love setting poems to music. Um, and I've done quite a lot of that over the years. And I suppose that really informs the music. So the words and how to color the words and how to shape the words, to sort of enhance them and draw them out, and also give them another meaning, perhaps like more depth of meaning, um, within the kind of a musical context, is something I love doing. And it is a very different process to just writing instrumental music, where there are no words. But I do, even if I'm just writing instrumental music, I find myself using words a lot to kind of inform how I go about writing that piece. Especially if I'm not writing it for myself. If I'm writing it for someone else, then I always start off writing loads of words down, just to kind of summarize like all of the things, like sort of brainstorming all of the things that I could put in the music that might influence the sound world, um, that I access.
You're the second guest I have talked to that have set poem to music. And personally, I find that when I listen to those pieces, there's a very hypnotic, almost kind of quality to it. And because poetry on its own, it's already a very beautiful thing. And when you put music around it, you just get transported to a totally different place. What are some of your favorite poems that you have set to music or pieces that you think work out really well for you?
Oh, well, I was commissioned last year by Edwin Morgan Commission. Edwin Morgan is an amazing Glaswegian poet, and he's really kind of chameleonic in his legacy. He went through so many different amalgamations of styles of poetry. So, for example, he did like quite kind of classical, structured poetry. He did poetry concrète, which is very experimental. He did performance poetry, and he worked a lot with musicians as well, especially at the end of his career. He worked with a jazz musician, here in Scotland, and he was always really interested in social issues, but also in entertaining and how, um, poems entertain people alongside. So he wanted them to be accessible, kind of first and foremost, but he also engaged in social issues, which was really clever, I think, and something I'm very interested in kind of doing a little myself. So Edwin Morgan is one that I absolutely adore. One of the poems I set by him was called One Cigarette, and it's beautiful. It's such a stunning poem.
I
Really,
remember watching that video. It's really different, isn't it?
yeah, it is different. So that's one poem, and then who else do I love? Carol Ann Duffy is someone that I just adore. She's a Scottish Glaswegian poet again, and I set 7 of her poems to music actually. She was the poet laureate here in the UK for a while, and she's a very fierce writer. She's very brave, but also very vulnerable and open, and quite sparing with her words. Just kind of gets you between the eyes with her poetry. And then my friend Rachel McCrum is someone else who I love setting music to. She writes quite well. The poems that I've set by her are quite mathematical. They're quite rhythmically structured, therefore really satisfying to put to music. So yeah, I loved setting one of her poems, which is called "Problems to Sharpen the Young," recently. So that's a kind of little selection of people that I really love. Another person to mention is Patrick James Errington, who's my pal, and he's Canadian and an amazing poet as well. I intend to set something by him soon, I think.
Gonna have to look him up.
Yeah, he's great.
That's awesome. I want to talk to you about a piece that you wrote called The Call. And that was the one that you talk about in the Sunroom Hat Chat. The most memorable piece for me from that story was that you were conducting with some flag. And I believe it was written during the pandemic. So you were outdoor, all spaced out. It was actually really cool. Tell us about that project and what was that experience like for you to create that piece?
Yeah, it was a commission from the Hidden Door Festival, which is on now actually in Edinburgh. It happens every June in Edinburgh. And the premise of this festival is that it opens up hidden spaces around the city of Edinburgh and kind of puts them on display in a way that perhaps they haven't been before. And so that was kind of my basic brief for this project was recontextualize a place which maybe isn't associated with music and certainly not with kind of performance. And so I that was like the very basic brief for this project. So I got this commission in the middle of lockdown. We weren't allowed to particularly leave our houses. We weren't allowed to get close to each other. We had to be at least 6 meters apart from each other at that point, I think. However, I managed to get 20 musicians together, all based in Edinburgh, all completely brilliant musicians in their own right, working in classical music, in folk music, and in jazz music, and in contemporary music. And I put them all together as 20 of my absolute favorite musicians. And I wrote a kind of a visual score for them, which has three sections. The first section is called Emergence. I had to think for a second there. And so this is kind of about emerging out of our houses, emerging onto the beach. And the second section is called The Wild. And that's kind of about the wildness of nature and the kind of wilderness that we all live in. And then the final section is called The Call. And that section is about coming together, calling to each other. Even when times are really difficult and you can't physically be together, we can still call to each other and hear each other. And so I got these 20 musicians together, put them on Portobello Beach, at least 10 meters apart from each other. So we were all spread out over the beach, 10 meters apart from each other. And there was such an amazing collection of instruments, including an alp horn, a drum kit, a double bass player, lots of violins, cellos, saxophone, trombone, flute. Amazing collection of people. Horn player. And so we were all spread ourselves out around the beach. And to symbolize each of the three sections, I made three different flags because I wanted to somehow conduct this piece because I was very far away from most of the other musicians, particularly the ones right at the back. So I wanted some kind of visual cue that was really obvious and big and was also a symbol. You know, I think flags can be used in so many different ways, but I think they can be used in really beautiful ways to kind of be a big symbol of something and like a declaration of something. And so I made three symbols, one to represent emergence, one to represent the wildness, and one to represent the call. And so I sort of waved these around on the beach. And you can watch a video of the entire piece, which is
Yeah, I'll put
involves a
the
lot
link because it's
of
so cool.
thanks. Yeah, so this piece, because we didn't have a chance to rehearse it at all, we literally, because we couldn't get together because it was lockdown, so we had to just turn up and perform it with no rehearsal. And so I wrote a very heavily improvised piece so that we could just kind of do it off the cuff without rehearsal. And we had like a Zoom meeting about it beforehand and talked through how it was going to work. And then we just did a couple of runs of it. We did a couple of takes of it, and it was filmed and it was recorded. And it was amazing. It was a beautiful experience. We had a small gathering of people, but we were really, keen to not advertise it because it was in the middle of the pandemic. So we didn't want lots of people turning up, because that, it wasn't allowed. So we didn't advertise it at all. A few people gathered, a few people were walking their dogs or fishing, and they kind of watched it. And it was kind of a lovely interaction with a space that had never really been used for music before. And it was the kind of response to that moment that we found ourselves in, where we were all out of work, all of these incredible musicians who are normally really busy, would never be able to get them together normally. We're all out of work, so they happen to all be available to do this amazing project. So yeah, crazy project, but really fun.
Yeah, I think, as much as we don't want pandemic or don't like it, I think there's something beautiful that came out of it that wouldn't otherwise, because the circumstances would be different. It doesn't allow it to happen in the same way. And I think this project is such a beautiful way to sort of remember what happened in that time, if you will. Because every time I look at the video, the physical distancing is so obvious. I'm like, yep, that was filmed in the pandemic. You wouldn't do it that way and any other time. So that was really, really cool.
It was really interesting, kind of acoustically, actually. Like the challenge of trying to hear each other on this freezing cold beach with the wind, really quite a heavy wind, howling around us. And so it was a really kind of quite a strange experience for the musicians. So then for them to hear the recording back, a lot of them were like, oh, right, okay, that's how it sounded. They just had no idea what was going on. So there's something in that as well that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
They just kind of kept going even though they didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
seems that you really enjoy playing with others, and you also play solo every so often. How do you find the difference in, touring with a big group of people versus doing it on your own?
I love working with people. I get so much out of collaboration and bouncing ideas around. But I have worked a lot in the pandemic on my own, as all of us have. So I've got, I've really been kind of reflecting on what I can do as a solo artist, kind of taking my work forwards. And I've written a lot of songs in response to the pandemic. And it's been a really good experience to be a bit more reflective and kind of dig deep within myself. And yeah, I've been playing a few concerts on my own here in Scotland, in the UK, the last few months, and it's been lovely to play on my own. It's a different thing to it's a very vulnerable thing to play your own music and your own songs on stage and not have, a band to back you up and to bounce around with. It's a much more intimate experience, I think, for the audience and for me. But it also, the thing that I love about playing on my own is that you can hold more time. You can really take your time and enjoy the spaciousness of a room and really enjoy the silences, play with the silences, and really play with those little interactions you have with the audience. And yeah, really, I suppose I can get really kind of intimate with playing with the harp, because I feel like there's, me and the harp are kind of a little team, and we're like playing each other, and so we have to work together.
It's a cold day, made it home safe. Why did you come over to stay so far away? I'm happy alone, dear. Moving on, dear. We could both just go. Or you could tell me what you want from me. want to know me, I'm walking away today. But before I go, you could just talk to me. Just tell me I'm sorry if I hurt you. Timing's never easy. Did I take too long? I'm just scared, you see. I'm so clumsy, but maybe you're the same.
And so just like really listening to the harp and letting the sound is so different in every single venue. I was playing in this amazing venue, a new venue here in Edinburgh called the Pianodrome, which has been created entirely out of old disused pianos, and it sounds like a massive piano. The venue itself, and
Wow.
it's just got this amazing acoustic, and it's in the round as well, circular, so that's also an interesting challenge, to play in the round and communicate with everyone that is surrounding you, and it's quite a vulnerable experience as well, but really interesting to engage with the audience. That's my main thing with playing on my own. You don't have anyone in the way in between you and the audience. You have to engage entirely on your own with the audience. So it's it's a really nice thing. It kind of breaks down all of the barriers. And it's definitely, there's something really kind of raw about just playing on your own with an audience. It's a very like intimate, vulnerable experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the visual of you and a pedal harp sort of interacting in front of the audience is also, I'm gonna imagine, a very interesting visual too, because not a lot of instruments are that size.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. It's such a massive instrument. It's got kind of so visual in itself.
Yeah.
Takes up the whole stage. I don't need to be there.
You're part of that team, so you have to be there.
Okay.
So in talking about your solo work, you are also on Patreon, and what can we find in your Patreon page?
I share kind of work that isn't published. So I hold a lot of my work back from the internet, from YouTube and stuff. I don't release lots of solo music on there. I mainly release it on my Patreon page. So if you'd like to hear all of my releases in their fullness, then you can join my Patreon page. And yeah, I'm always releasing new music on there. I also sometimes share my influences. So I like to read, because as I said, words are a big part of my influences. And so quite often I read a story or a piece of work that's really influenced me, a story or a poem or a chapter or something, or an essay or article or something on there, and I talk about what it meant to me to read it, and how it's worked its way into my work. So yeah, you can find that on my Patreon page, and yes, mainly lots of new music is what I'm putting up there at the moment.
That's awesome. How else can we stay in touch with the different projects and work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, I've got a website which is all sparkly and refurbished. So you can go and find me there if you want. So that's Esther. Oh, let me just check what it is. That's terrible. I don't even know my own web.
It just got
It's,
renovated. So
I know, esterswift.co.uk is the website, and there you'll see that some upcoming gigs that I have, and also links to the different projects that I do, my outreach work, because I do quite a lot of workshops and lead quite a lot of creative workshops as well. And also I'm on social media. So if you want to find me on social media, I'm quite prolific on Instagram, and that's Esther Swift Music, I think. Let me double check that as well.
it's like
Esther
phone
Swift
number.
Music.
We never call ourselves, so we don't we can never be so sure what is our own handle.
That's it. So yeah, Esther Swift Music is me on Instagram, and that's where I do most of my social media. I'm also on Twitter, which is Esther Kate Swift, I think. And I'm on Facebook as well. So
Like,
please find me.
it's so lovely to talk to you. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person in Half Fest and hopefully catch one of your shows if you're gonna tour in New Zealand while you're over there.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, I'm so excited about coming over to New Zealand and being at the Heart Festival. Can't wait. It's going to be
Yes.
brilliant.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I really enjoy our chat. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.